Who are today's Tajiks? The term has had different meanings at different times in history, but for our purposes, simply put, they're the Persian speakers of Central Asia, Iranians of the East. Tajiks live, of course, in their nominal republic, Tajikistan, but also in Afghanistan, where the number of Tajiks is as much as double that of Tajikistan, and also in Uzbekistan, where their number is hard to know, but could be as much or more as in Tajikistan. It's the poorest of the former Soviet republics. Remittances from Tajik guest workers in Russia account for 50% of the national economy. Unfortunately, in Russia, Tajiks are typically scapegoated for all of the country's problems. They're stereotyped as criminals and terrorists. In fact, however, Tajik labor is the foundation of the Russian economy. In Tajikistan, many factories fell into disuse after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. This is due to the fact that during the Soviet period, the system for production was to distribute the stages of production amongst the various republics, so that a product would start in one place and then move on to another place and then another place and another place before it was finally finished. And that worked fine as long as the Soviet Union was one country. But after 1991, when all of these countries were independent, you had things like, borders to cross and, trade agreements to negotiate. And basically, these production lines, in many cases, simply ceased to function. And so it's not just in Tajikistan, but in fact, all over the former Soviet Union, we have a lot of abandoned factories. The result in Tajikistan was that many Tajiks simply left the cities where they could no longer find work and returned to their villages in the countryside, where they had roots and family networks and could grow their own food and so forth. Ironically, prior to Russia's colonization of Central Asia during the 19th century, Tajiks were the custodians of Islamic high culture for more than 1,000 years. So what brought about the fall of such an illustrious and accomplished nation? In short, the Bolsheviks who created the Soviet Union saw the Tajiks as representing an obsolete past, and they transferred their powers and territories to the rustic Turkic Uzbeks, whom they saw as more malleable. They gave all the major Tajik cities and productive lands to the Uzbeks. So you can see here on this map the major cities: Samarkand, Bukhara, Khojan, Tashkent, Kokand, Andijan. They were all originally incorporated into the new Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. The yellow area there, which was originally just a sub-republic within the Uzbek Republic, basically had no cities. What you see there, Dushanbe, which became the capital of Tajikistan, was simply a village at that time. The name Dushanbe means Monday in Persian, and that's because they had a Monday market there. So the Soviets basically built up a capital there from scratch. This left the Tajiks with an underdeveloped, mostly mountainous territory, about 93% mountains, and only a few small towns and not a single historical urban center. The Pamir Highway, which the Soviets built during the 1930s, makes its way through some of the world's highest, most inaccessible mountains. Today, most of the traffic is trucks bringing cheap products from China. But many parts of the country are still accessible only on foot. So you can see here a relief map. The Pamir Mountains, you see there in the center, that makes up the region of Tajikistan known as Badakhshan or Gorno-Badakhshan, which is about 42% of the land area, only has 3% of the population, and they are mostly not the same ethnicity. They're called Tajiks, but the Pamiri peoples speak different Iranian languages. 4 or 5 different languages are spoken there. Of course, they learn Persian or Tajiki as going to school. But they also follow a different religion. Most Tajiks are Sunni Muslim, whereas the Pamiris are mostly Ismaili Shiites who are followers of the Aga Khan. So we have the Tajiks have a serious accessibility issue, not just the fact that the Pamirs are very, very difficult to travel through, but even if, the fact that by the end of the 1920s, the Soviets attached this northern part of this western part of the Fergana Valley to the north of Tajikistan so that they would have some arable land and also the city of Khojan, the important historical city. Problem was that there's a range of mountains here called the Fan Mountains, which most of the year were completely impassable. The Soviets got around that by building a railroad linking Dushanbe here around these mountains to Samarkand and on to Tashkent. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, when these countries became independent, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan closed the border. That transport route was no longer available, and during much of the time when this passage between north and south, the 2 major cities, Khojan and Dushanbe, could not be done by road. They had to rely on flights. The flights were often canceled because of bad weather. And it wasn't until actually 2015, just 10 years ago, that a tunnel finally was dug through the Fan Mountains to link the Fergana Valley in the north to the capital, Dushanbe, and the rest of the country. During the Soviet period, many Tajik intellectuals, most notably Sadruddin Aini, chose to remain in Samarkand, which was historically the heart of Tajik culture, but now part of the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. After the fall of the USSR in 1991, the new president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, who was himself of Tajik origin, launched a brutal campaign against the Tajik language and culture. In a country, Uzbekistan, where anywhere from 15 to 30% or more of the population were native Tajiki speakers. Across the border in Tajikistan, the country fell into a civil war from 1992 to 1997, which ravaged the country. This was a war which basically showed that during the Soviet period, the failure to construct anything like a Tajik national identity. You had factions from different parts of the country that basically saw themselves as not having anything to do with each other, and they began fighting each other. Today, Tajikistan enjoys a fragile peace. Here you have main avenue in the center of Dushanbe, nice tree-lined avenue through the city. But this peace is due largely to the iron-fisted rule of Imam Ali Rahman, who has been president since 1994. The sectors of Tajikistan economy are allegedly controlled by Imam Ali Rahman and his family. I say allegedly because a lot of this cannot be clearly proven, but it's suspected. Telecommunications, including a telephone and internet monopoly. Talco Aluminium Company, which is Tajikistan's largest industry. It's technically state-owned, but it seems that the profits are getting channeled off to a private account in the British Virgin Islands. In banking, the largest private bank, Orion, is owned by Rahman's brother-in-law. The construction industry, of course, very important, especially when it comes to state contracts. Agriculture, especially cotton. Cotton became the main agricultural product of this part of the world, Central Asia, during the Soviet period, because the Soviets wanted to compete with the US and India, which was not really very practical because cotton is a very thirsty crop, and it used up all the water from the major rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, which would get siphoned off in canals to feed the cotton fields. And as a result, the Aral Sea, which used to be the fourth largest inland body of water in the world, has almost disappeared because the rivers that fed it were siphoned off for the cotton industry. And during the late Soviet period, people in Central Asia were saying, well, you know, the Soviets have ruined our agriculture, and we can no longer feed ourselves because we have to grow cotton for export instead of, you know, food that we can actually eat. But perhaps not surprisingly, given that the post-Soviet leaders of these countries were very much Soviet products and very much had that mindset, the cotton monoculture has remained pretty much in place in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, much to the detriment of the environment and to the health of the people. Speaking of health, the healthcare system in Tajikistan is dominated by a pharmaceutical company owned by the president's daughter. But they also own spas, ski resorts, the customs offices, and on and on. Rahman's son Rostam is both mayor of Dushanbe and also head of the National Assembly, seems to be being groomed to take over for his father at some point. And here we have the happy family portrait.